The next one is accommodation. So also as one of your suppliers. As you can see, this subchapter under accommodation is varied within varied between mandatory and non-mandatory criteria. So with mandatory criteria, the first one is always policy. So you see that we ask if you have accommodation, sustainable accommodation policy towards your accommodation providers, which means that policy had to really specify towards the nature business from accommodation, who can do so much regarding sustainability. Again, if you never worked on creating a policy for accommodation, you're probably lost and you don't know where to start with, which is okay, because that's why Travel Life is here. So always go to guidance to see what do we suggest. We do have suggestions. Sometimes we do have suggestions for country specific as well. So because I'm under the Travel Life partner for Indonesia, so you can see that Indonesia as a specific guideline for Indonesia. Or if you scroll down, you can see English version, which is the international proposals that Travel Life has for all worldwide Travel Life members. We do have a sample accommodation policy that you could use in here. Again, I just want to brief a little bit because I have experience with auditing for companies where they just completely take our templates without even changing the format, without even putting the format of their corporate identity in the policy and just attach it here saying that, oh yeah, now we have a policy. Because if I do see that you just take the policy out, just to be in compliance with Travel Life without putting any effort, then I'm going to be very, very strict when it comes to auditing for your Travel Life partner and asking another part. And for companies who really just take the policy out and without planning anything, then I would really work with you until you plan something out. I would wait until I see something in progress before I can give you Travel Life partner. So in the end, if you're being dishonest with the whole Travel Life certification process and just really do a certain document out of showing Travel Life to be in compliance with our requirements to get the Travel Life partner, it won't go that fast. So so you can forget about it. But even though you have a policy, but if you don't show a certain progress to me, then I won't be able to proceed further with Travel Life partner. So really, when you take the template out from the Travel Life reference, do sit down with your team. Do talk to people within your team to see which policy is relevant for your company, relevant for your accommodations. Even when it's relevant, you can think about the feasibility of it, whether it would be applicable for this year, for the next year. You want to make the policy as short and sweet as possible because you're not working within your company anymore. You're working with the suppliers who also have many other suppliers, which means that your power is not that absolute over them. So you do want to make it easy for them to improve with sustainability practice. You don't want to make like a full page of policy where they just read inside in without comprehending what is in the policy. So really, really make sure that we just take out the things that matter to you and to your accommodation. So again, you can use a template to create the policy. Once you sit down with the team, finalize on the policy, you can tick yes in here, attach your policy in here, and then it's and move on to the next criteria. So with 6.2 is about communication. Again, now that you have the policy, you always need to communicate it because it's a policy towards your suppliers. So you need to communicate what you have in your inventory. So the communication works the same with inbound partner, either via email, inspection, whatever means of communication. You need to show us here with evidence that you have communicated this towards your clients. 6.3 is about certified accommodation. So this is very specific. If any of the hotels you work with has acquired any international or national certification on sustainability, but if it's not available within your country, which I know that in certain countries there's none of their accommodation has worked with sustainability certification, then you can click on NA. But if it's only one or two companies that have acquired the certification, any sort of certification on sustainability, then you can click yes here and mention the name of those accommodation. You also need to indicate the percentage in terms of turnover or pax-night over that accommodations in the last reporting year, and also mention the number of the certified accommodation in here as well. So don't forget that for some criterion, we do have further text box for you to answer the requirement. Sometimes I can imagine that if you only on this page of the Travel Live of the Travel Live reporting, it's very convenient to move to the next criteria. But always remember to scroll down. Because as we have mentioned in the first webinar for chapter 0 to chapter 3, whatever you have report in, after you answer yes or no or not applicable, and if you type anything in here, you need to save it here first. So you always, if you type anything in the text box, always save it using the save button in here instead of moving next. The system sometimes doesn't save your answer. It does sometimes save, but sometimes it doesn't save. So you want to make sure that everything you entered in would stay even when you log out from it and when you come back to it again, because you don't want to do the work double times. So always remember to click on save before you, after you type anything in the text box, before you move to the next criterion. So contract condition, the same. It asks that you need to have basic sustainability clause in the contract with your partner. If you have it, great. Attach the contract here or attach the contract addendum here that you work with hotels. In this case, you also need to report to us if you already have it in place and we don't see any action planned further, which means that you already have contacted several accommodations. Then we're going to ask you how many accommodations have signed in, how many percent of your total contracted accommodation providers have signed in an agreement that have basic sustainability clauses in it. With distribution of best practice standards and guidance, this asks if you help them or if you disseminate any information that you know regarding the standards and guidance for sustainability practices for accommodation. This you can easily find by going to, if I'm going to open in the new tab. So we're in the planning and reporting page. If we go back to home page, under learning is where you can find information regarding hotels that you can download and send it to the hotels for their reference. So if you go to learning and background info, you can see here are the collectives of documents, useful documents that we have collected over the years regarding a certain topic of sustainability that you could use before you go on Google and search for different practice. So under hotels and sustainability, you can see there's many different documents that you could use for your accommodation. So it's a good practice guidebook, or if it's like a hotel checklist. Some company want to use checklists when they go inspect hotels. So this is one of the reference lists that you can go to There's a lot of criteria under this checklist. So again, you might want to minimize it. There's also a technical booklet for hotels. So all of those criteria, so all of those articles, you can easily upload it on one of your Google Drive or something. Click save the link and send this link to your hotels at least. It's you don't need to monitor whether they actually read the documents, but at least you have access to those useful documents and you share it to your accommodation. So if you do so, then you can click on yes. And if you do so, then if you click on yes, then we also need to see the communication you have made, especially via email with your accommodation. So again, by telling us how many accommodation have received this and a screenshot of your communication over email, for example. 6.6 is non-mandatory criteria. Is a baseline self-evaluation. So this can be under the form of checklist. So we have went through this again. Travelite also have the hotel checklist for hotels that are smaller or larger than 160 beds in their property. So you can either use that checklist as the assessment form for your hotels, or if you already have some of the checklists that you do internally within your own system, then great. Then you need to report to us here. However, this baseline self-evaluation also asks specifically if sustainability questions are included in this baseline self-evaluation as well. So the basic question that you could ask is to ask if the company have or are working with any sustainability certification scheme at the moment. If not, have they practiced with any sustainability standards for hotels? If yes, then what are those standards that they're practicing? So those could be the criteria that you include in the checklist if you do so to your hotels. But if you do not have a checklist, if you do not have those questions asked, and if you do not yet plan to do it, then you can answer no, because it's a non-mandatory criteria. So as I said, it won't affect the decision of the travel life partner. Participation to training education, the same with inbound partner. If you have asked them to join any education, then report it here. It is mandatory criteria, so you could, so again, you can at least add them into the Travel Life system, which is for free. So, so there's no excuse of not adding them in the Travel Life system to do the training. And as you can see under learning online courses, we have 7 courses here for you to take part of. And this is also, if you add your hotel in the system, they would have the same access to all of those training, that several training would be relevant for them on first engaging with sustainability. So that's the least thing you can do at this stage and report to us. If not, then you can also plan out that, create an action plan to allow access to the top, say 10 hotels that you have very high volumes with at the moment, to give them access on Travel Life. So you can give a timeline of 2 or 3 months for them to come back to you with a certificate that they have completed a certain course. So I would recommend that when you create the action plan, really think about what course you ask them to do first. So after doing the course yourself, you can see that, okay, maybe we want them to start with the basic training, or we want them to ask with internal environmental management, because then they can apply this a lot even in their rooms. So when you create an action plan, you need to specify, for example, 25% of hotels to complete the internal environmental management course, and you can choose a person who would monitor this. Again, you can give them like 2 months. I think 2 months is more than enough to give them time, because the test, to go through the whole course on the test, it would relatively take 2 hours, 2 hours and a half. So they can easily find that 2 hours within the next 2 months, for example, to do the task. So if you create this as an action, for example, then what we would ask you is that, okay, can you please attach the list of that 20 hotels that you want to target here? So as long as you can attach the list, as long as you have a clear action plan on how you're going to do it, then you can click yes, and it would be validated for Travel Live right away, even though, so we don't need to wait until the next 2 months until you can show us the result to give you the Travel Live partner. That is for the Travel Live certified stage. So that's with 6.7, participating to training and education. 6.8 as if you, this is a policy, so you can also add this into your policy that upon request, the company would always support collaborative initiative with other tour operator and all stakeholder to promote sustainability among accommodation in destination. So if you do have an initiative that you ask your accommodation to join in, or if the accommodation themselves have any initiative towards sustainability, then you would be willing to support on those. If there had already something been done in the past, then great, just give us some example of what had been done, who involved, when did it happen, but if nothing happened in the past yet, then we need to see that you put it in your policy that upon any request you would be supportive of those initiatives. So it's in a sense, it's a policy suggestion. Incentive. So by incentive, you can there's several ways to do this. Either if you have a section on your website where you recommend sustainable transportation, sustainable accommodation options, or if you do include them in the itinerary, and in the itinerary you can specify. So the very normal itinerary format is that you describe what's going on in the day, and then in the evening you say overnight at ABC hotels. So instead of just saying ABC hotels, you can add another sentence that this hotels actively work on reducing their energy by using all LED bulbs throughout their properties, for example. So you want to specify those sustainability credentials from the hotels that you're using. So that is also an incentive that you give to the accommodations, or when you do sales, you have a certain list of accommodations that you have worked with, you have identified their sustainability performance, you have now ranged them as the top sustainable accommodation to work with. Your sales are aware of this, your contract, your product managers are aware of this, your operators are aware of this. So when they deal with clients, they would recommend those hotels first before they recommend any other hotels in the same city. So those are different kinds of incentives that you could give to accommodations. If you have any other cards, just report it here. However you're doing it, I was just giving some recommendations for, in case you haven't done it yet, you can start consider doing it. Also, it's a non-mandatory criteria. So if you do not have it yet and you haven't really done so and don't think you would have the capacity to work on it in the next year or the next 2 years, you might consider this later, and you can easily answer no and move to the next criterion. So, 6.10 is trying compulsory labor, which means that you do not work with accommodation providers who employ children who below the age of 14, or in specific country they even have this age up to 16 years old. So it depends on the country where you operate at and the national regulations to to create this policy. And this is also a policy clause that you can put in the general policy towards accommodation. Locally produced souvenirs can also be terms in your policy that you prefer accommodation who offer local and sustainable produced souvenirs. But of course, it's not. As I mentioned, this is not the absolute policy that you only choose hotels who offer local or sustainable produced souvenirs. It means that you try to stimulate them by putting it in a policy, and by putting it in policy, the hotels would have better comprehensions of what is the demand out there for the outlets that they have. So that's 6.11. Same thing with 6.12. You also prefer accommodation that respect and feature local architecture, setting, and cultural heritage. So this can also be a term in the policy. Sexual exploitation of children, which is the same thing with partner agencies. So I'm not going to repeat myself again. This can also be a clause in the contract with your accommodation providers. This is also a policy term. So you would terminate the contract if you figure out that the accommodation providers jeopardize the provision or integrity of the basic services to the neighboring communities around them. Local fare and food is also another policy terms that you say that you can put in the policy that you prefer to work with accommodations that purchase and use local food products. Same thing with 6.16, also a policy terms that all the contracted accommodation are expected to limit the negative impacts on the biodiversity of the areas that they base, which mean that they do not, like, this is something that you can easily check by checking the menu in the restaurant if they do have restaurant or even breakfast, that they do not offer red list of species on the menu.